search for California's Night Stalker continues.
The mystifying face of American serial killers and the desperate effort to find them and stop them.
These guys have an insatiable thirst for power, for domination, for control. They enjoy playing God and deciding who will live and who will die.
I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century. Judging from newspapers and television, you might think America is awash in serial killers. But the fact is, there are just about the same number of them as there were 100 years ago. What has changed is law enforcement's ability to detect this especially disturbing brand of murderer. It's a new approach that dates largely from one high-profile case in the mid-70s. The killer known as Son of Sam, who transfixed New York with fear and fascination as he went on his murderous spree.
New York City is being terrorized by a gunman.
Most of the women victims, including yesterday's, had dark, shoulder-length hair.
Well, the city is preoccupied with the killer, who in one note signed himself the Son of Sam.
Even blasé New Yorkers were frightened by a wave of killings that began in 1976. Over a 13-month period, 5 women and 1 man were shot to death, and 7 other people were injured, some of them seriously.
People were absolutely captivated by the Son of Sam. A sense of fear, anxiety, suspicion, public outcry, rage against the police for not catching him, fearfulness about walking the streets. I think it just absolutely focused people's attention on their vulnerability.
The wave of killings began with a murder in the Bronx. 18-year-old Donna Lauria was an ambulance attendant who lived at home with her parents. On July 29, 1976, she was sitting with her girlfriend outside her home when a stranger approached and opened fire. Her parents heard the gunshots from inside the house.
My wife comes screaming in the hall. It was shot. I ran down. By the time I got down, she was dead in the street.
It was not until a second killing 6 months later in the Forest Hills district of Queens that police began to suspect a serial killer might be responsible. On January 30th, 1977, 26-year-old Christine Freund had gone to the movies with her boyfriend, John Deal. Afterward, as they sat in John's car waiting for the engine to warm up, 3 bullets burst through the windshield.
It was like a crash. I turned around, and Chris comes falling to my shoulder. Over here on my shoulder, I yelled, Chris, 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 you know, and I had her by the head over here. I pulled her over, you know, as she fell on me, you know, over here. And then I seen the blood and everything, and I started screaming.
We had recovered a bullet out of the windshield. And they said, gee, that's a big bullet. And then we found out that they had a homicide up in the Bronx with a big caliber bullet. And we brought those people down. And then as a result of that, we became aware of possibility of one person shooting all these people.
Through slugs taken from the victims' bodies, the killer's weapon was identified as a Bulldog .44 revolver. Not an elegant gun, according to firearms experts, but lethal at close range.
The .44 is a big gun with a big kick. To fire it, you hold on tight with 2 hands and brace yourself, or it could knock you down. Experts think it is a gun like this, one of the 28,000 Bulldog .44 revolvers manufactured by the Charter Arms Company of Hartford that the New York City killer is using. The chamber holds 5 bullets. He usually fires 4 shots.
2 months later, the killer struck again in Forest Hills, Queens. He attacked a 21-year-old Armenian student, Virginia Voskerichian, as she walked home from a day of classes.
Captain Borelli, as of this moment, can you reconstruct what happened last night?
We know the victim is a student at Columbia University. We know
she put her books up in front of her face, and she was shot right through the mouth here.
The growing media coverage of the murders led the killer to make his first mistake. Because the police had told the press he appeared to be a woman hater, he left a note at the site of his next attack.
We have a double homicide. It's on the service road of the Hutchinson River Parkway.
The victims were 18-year-old Valentina Siriani and her boyfriend, 20-year-old Alexander Esau. They were killed with 4 shots from the familiar Bulldog 44 as they sat in the front seats of their car. And lying on the asphalt 10 feet away was a rambling 4-page message for Captain Borelli.
And I think he started out by saying that he's not a woman hater. And for the first time in my letter, he used the expression son of Sam. And I think that somehow or another that got out, and that's how he's called the Son of Sam killer.
In addition to this note, the murderer also sent a letter, but it wasn't about the killings. The letter went to a resident of Yonkers named Sam Carr. It was sent by Carr's neighbor, 24-year-old David Berkowitz, and the letter concerned Sam Carr's dog.
This is a letter that David Berkowitz sent to the Carr family, and states the following. I have asked you kindly to stop that dog from howling all day long, yet he continues to do so. My life is destroyed now. I have nothing to lose anymore. I can see that there shall be no peace in my life or my family's life until I end yours.
It turned out later that Berkowitz believed Carr's dog was in fact a devil that urged him to kill. In labeling himself Son of Sam, Berkowitz seemed to be referring to the dog. At first, though, detectives had not connected the note with the citywide attacks, and as a result, the killer had shot and wounded still another couple mid-summer of 1977, bringing his total to 5 murders and 4 injuries. The killings alarmed the city. Nearly 5,000 people a day were making phone calls to their local precincts to report suspicions and fears. Young women especially felt threatened by the vicious, roving killer.
When you feel like you got long brown hair and you live in Queens, you better be afraid.
People going out cutting their hair and dyeing it, you know, because they know we like shoulder-length hair, or wearing their hair up, or wearing scarves.
Beauty parlors, they told me they were swamp women bleaching their hair blonde and cutting it short. Kind of the lovers' lanes of the city, areas like that were deserted.
The killer fed the fear with more letters. He wrote to Jimmy Breslin, a columnist at one of the city's tabloids.
I received this letter in wild handwriting, slanted printing, with words hurled out at you, with using semicolons. Hello from the bowels of the earth, from the ants eating blood in the cracks of the sidewalks. It was crazy.
He was doing that to make sure he gets attention. He wanted his name in press. Part of what he did was glorify or romanticize the killings.
But while the letters struck most people as the ravings of a lunatic, they did contain details of considerable help to the police. Some specific points rang a bell with local police in Yonkers.
The first line of a particular letter to Jimmy Breslin was, hello from the gutters of New York City, which are filled with dog manure, and then he went on to list a few other things, and we just found it strange that with this penchant and this penchant for dogs and howling dogs and how much they bothered him, that the first thing that was mentioned was dog manure. These things tended to pique our interest a little bit and get us thinking that possibly, you know, this guy Berkowitz might have something to do with the shootings downtown.
Tragically, however, the link to Berkowitz was not made quickly enough to prevent still another attack.
In New York early this morning, the .44 caliber killer tried to kill again.
20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz was the 6th person killed in little more than a year. She was shot in the head at close range, as was her boyfriend, 20-year-old Robert Violante, who lost sight in his left eye but is expected to live.
When I got here, the people were still in the car. One guy was crawling out of the car. The girl was still in the car. And they said that it was supposedly to be Son of Sam, and that he fled through this here park over here.
But the police net was finally closing in on the so-called Son of Sam. On the night of the latest murder in Brooklyn, Yonkers resident Sam Carr was reporting David Berkowitz to the police for shooting, though only injuring, his dog. That same night, Berkowitz received a parking ticket while getting ready to murder Stacy Moskowitz. Detectives now wanted to know what this Yonkers resident was doing at the Brooklyn crime scene.
So they called the Yonkers police and they said, oh, what a pain in the ass this guy is. We've had trouble with him, a lot of trouble. I said, really? Yeah, he lives on Pine, you know, 33 Pine, whatever it was. They says, oh, I think we're gonna come up and see him.
Detectives staked out his apartment, and late on the night of August 10th, 1977, they finally arrested David Berkowitz.
At 1 this morning, 24-year-old David Berkowitz, who detectives believe is the son of Sam, was brought to police headquarters in Manhattan. He was wearing frayed jeans and an open sports shirt, and he was smiling slightly.
Apparently, the arrest had come not a moment too soon. Berkowitz had collected more weapons and reportedly had bigger plans.
They caught up with Berkowitz Wednesday night just as he was leaving his apartment to look for more victims. And the police say that Berkowitz told them his long-range plans included a mass murder with a machine gun at a discotheque on a Long Island resort. The mother of Stacy Moskowitz, one of his last victims, if indeed this is the .44 caliber killer, says that she is walking on air.
Miss Moskowitz's mother expressed what came to be a fairly common feeling among New Yorkers toward the killer.
I hope he never has a minute's peace. I hope he suffers and just eats his heart out with a cancer. Because he's nothing, he's not human. He's not human.
Of course, the Berkowitz arrest came as a relief to many anxious New Yorkers.
That night, I was sitting there watching Johnny Carson, and a crawl came across the bottom of the screen that the New York City police captured the suspected son of Sam, and I cried at that time. I just, I let loose and cried.
There was a terrific sense of relief. The only thing I can equate it to was the end of World War II. People were dancing in the street.
There was a sigh of relief. I think people were absolutely frenzied in New York, fearing that they might be shot, killed, if they were holding hands with a boyfriend, girlfriend, what have you. I think it established, too, now that he was caught, the next series of logical questions, which would be, what makes these guys tick?
The arrest of David Berkowitz, however, did not close the book on the Son of Sam case. In fact, in many ways, the case was just beginning. That story when the 20th century returns.
Avalon, because peace and quiet aren't going to come looking for you.
You're looking at someone who just bought a home with no down payment. How? He called Ditech.com and borrowed 125% of the purchase price. With your good credit, you too can finance up to $500,000 with no down payment. Use the extra cash to pay closing costs, pay off bills, or buy new furniture. Buy a home of your own with no down payment. Call Ditech.com at 1-800-71-FIXED for the 125 Dream Loan today.
I have seen one or two things in my life, but never anything like this.
Time magazine calls Eyes Wide Shut Stanley Kubrick's haunting final masterpiece. Vivid, brilliant, unforgettable.
I don't think you realize what kind of trouble you were in.
If you only knew.
Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman. Eyes Wide Shut, rated R. Starts Friday, July 16th at a theater near you.
We all do dumb things. Paying too much for car insurance doesn't have to be one of them. Geico, a 15-minute call could save you 15% or more on car insurance. We all do dumb things. Paying too much for car insurance doesn't have to be one of them. Geico, a 15-minute call could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
The mission was to put a man into space at a time when Americans needed heroes, and these men delivered. A History Channel special from those who flew into space and into history. Moonshot, all this week at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific, only on the History Channel.
David Berkowitz, the notorious Son of Sam, was arraigned on 6 charges of murder in a Brooklyn court in August of 1977. But before he could be tried, authorities had to decide whether Berkowitz was mentally competent to stand trial. And the problem was that sometimes he was, and sometimes he wasn't.
There was a new twist in the proceedings, which were held in a makeshift courtroom in the hospital where Berkowitz is under psychiatric observation. When the court clerk asked the routine question, "Are you David R. Berkowitz?" Berkowitz answered, "No, Your Honor, I am not."
I thought he would be kind of off the wall in his answers and all, but no, he was very in my mind, very competent, sitting there telling us everything that he did, why he did it, but he had a strange look in his eyes.
One early psychiatric assessment found Berkowitz mentally incompetent.
An argument is building up over the psychiatric report. New York City prosecutors argued yesterday that the substance of the report doesn't fit its conclusion. About 35 relatives of those Berkowitz is accused of killing gathered outside the hospital. They protested the possibility that Berkowitz, if found mentally incompetent to stand trial, would probably spend the rest of his days in a mental institution.
The actual psychiatric report did appear to conflict with its conclusion.
Another judge in New York City has released transcripts of conversations David Berkowitz had with 2 psychiatrists. Berkowitz has been charged as the .44 caliber or Son of Sam killer. In the conversations, he said, "I did the shooting. I killed the people." He also says he was driven to the killings by demons, which were so real to him that "I don't feel insane."
Police revealed that Berkowitz worked at the post office. At home, they said, he led a reclusive life in his grim apartment in Yonkers.
We just kind of felt that what we were going to see in there was just something totally out of the ordinary. Looking from the outside at his apartment window, he had quilts and heavy blankets completely sealing any light or anything coming in from the outside.
It was a studio apartment, 1 room with a little galley, mattress on the floor, detective magazines, writings on the wall. Strange little place.
As investigators continued to probe, they found that Berkowitz had bullied other children as he was growing up. As an adult, he had set fire to houses, even stabbed strangers in the street without ever being arrested. Police said that he'd been adopted as a child and had been told, wrongly, that his natural mother was dead. In fact, they said he'd been given up for adoption, something he first discovered as a young man, to his intense fury. Soon after his arrest, his adoptive father made a somber appearance.
If David did these things, I don't expect you to forgive them, forgive him, as this would be too much to ask of you.
Nat Berkowitz's adopted son expressed no remorse. That was only one of many reasons why police questioned his mental health.
Detectives would go in to talk to him, and they'd come out holding their hands up. He talks about a 2,000-year-old dog. What can you do with him?
At the hospital where Berkowitz is being held for psychiatric observation, one of his guards is quoted by the New York Daily News as saying, "Berkowitz sleeps like a baby and eats like a horse." The guard also says he often talks to himself and laughs aloud for no apparent reason.
In the end, Berkowitz avoided the insanity issue altogether by pleading guilty to all charges.
Then the judges carefully led Berkowitz, who seemed calm and spoke in a monotone, through a series of questions to establish his guilt and his ability to understand what was happening to him. "Why did you go to Brooklyn that night?" "To kill somebody," answered Berkowitz. "What did you do when you saw the couple in the car?" "I shot them." "How many times?" "5 times. Did you mean to cause them bodily harm?" "No, I meant to kill them."
He not only killed my daughter, he destroyed my family, other families. As far as I'm concerned, my house will never be the same. And he just robbed a lot of people of a lot of things.
You think justice can be done in this case?
Not unless they bring back the death penalty, and he burns for it.
When he appeared for sentencing several weeks later, Berkowitz apparently tried to confound justice once and for all.
Shortly after he arrived at the Brooklyn courthouse, Berkowitz bit a guard badly enough to send him to the hospital as several guards stopped him from lunging toward a 7th-floor window.
He was in the back and he just exploded. And he knocked 11 down, 11 court officers, corrections officers, like they were bowling pins.
90 minutes late, he made a wild entrance into the courtroom, looking straight at Mrs. Nisa Moskowitz, mother of one of his 6 murder victims, Stacy Moskowitz. To a weird nursery rhyme-like tune, Berkowitz, who had never known Stacy Moskowitz, sang "Stacy was a whore." Mrs. Moskowitz bolted out of her seat and screamed back, "You animal!"
I felt like killing. I felt like scratching his eyes out. Because it was an act, that's why.
Berkowitz was sentenced on the 6 murder charges to a combined total of 365 years in Attica State Prison. But that did not close the book on the Son of Sam case. A kind of Berkowitz mania had already been building up, had been from the moment he was arrested.
After the capture of Berkowitz, 35 Pine Street became, at that point in time, a historical place in the annals of crime.
People down there trying to pry bricks out of the building for souvenirs.
Sightseers were there. People were hawking memorabilia, from what I understand, on the street there.
We are absolutely captivated by these guys. We find them fascinating. I believe that it fills a very real need to be frightened by someone. Perhaps as we close out this century, this is the last bastion of evil that we can kind of resonate to. Often I've compared these fellows to vampires in many respects.
New York's tabloids competed for Berkowitz scoops. Police, attorneys, and the friends and relatives of his victims were hounded for fresh information and for gossip.
Once the serial killer is certainly apprehended, there is a bit of a feeding frenzy. I think people want to know as much as possible.
Media interest was heightened by the reported existence of audio-taped discussions between Berkowitz and a lawyer supposedly acting for him, tapes that were available for sale.
The sale was pushed by Philip Peltz, a lawyer claiming to represent David Berkowitz. Peltz, through an associate, is said to have approached several publishers unsuccessfully, offering tape-recorded conversations with Berkowitz. The asking price, $50,000. What did Berkowitz say on the tapes?
Gave us information that he spoke about the killings, that he spoke about sexual references in the tapes, and really was pandering the tapes to us, suggesting that there was all kinds of newsy things that we would be interested in.
Quite apart from the recordings of Berkowitz, which newspaper editors declined to buy, there was speculation that the killer might write his own memoirs. There was even a report of a possible movie deal.
How we respond to these apprehended serial killers is concerns about the possibility that they might profit by sharing their story, by selling their story.
That's why the New York State Legislature passed a bill called the Son of Sam Law to prevent convicted killers from telling their stories for profit. And while the Berkowitz case spurred the New York State Legislature to action, he also served as a prod to law enforcement agencies around the country to learn more about serial killers, the crucial kind of learning that's become known as profiling.
It established an opportunity for law enforcement behavioral scientists to begin asking the question, is it possible that there are more of these guys out there? Can we learn something about his modus operandi, his inner workings that would help us to establish a template, a way to predict, perhaps, and this would be the fantasy, who might be the next Berkowitz, but perhaps more realistically, how do we apprehend someone like a Berkowitz more quickly?
The lessons police learned from the David Berkowitz case in the 1970s helped them solve a series of baffling serial killer cases in the 80s and 90s. That story when the 20th century returns.
With the Northwest Airlines and Continental Airlines Alliance, you can earn World Perks miles whether you fly on Northwest to Seattle, or Asia, or even Continental to Central America. In fact, your World Perks miles add up no matter where you fly on either airline. With service to hundreds of cities worldwide, you can now earn free travel faster than ever. Which is the whole point.
The Northwest and Continental Airlines Global Alliance. It's miles ahead.
Introducing the new full-size Toyota Tundra. With the most stress-resistant frame in its class and over 2,000 pounds of available payload capacity, the Tundra's tough enough to do the work of some of the biggest trucks on Earth. And it's a lot easier to park. Introducing the new four-door Tundra. Have we gone too far, or have others not gone far enough?
Where will you be when your grandson gets his first taste of the ocean? When man walks on Mars? When your children want to discover their heritage? Life is filled with moments you don't want to miss. That's why if you have high cholesterol and heart disease, you should know about Zocor. Zocor is proven to help save lives by reducing the risk of a heart attack. So where will you be tomorrow? That could depend on what you do today. When diet and exercise aren't enough, talk to your doctor about adding Zocor. Zocor is a prescription medication and is not right for everyone, including women who are nursing, pregnant, or may become pregnant, or people with liver problems. Your doctor may do blood tests to check for liver problems, because serious side effects can result. Tell your doctor about any muscle pain or weakness you experience while on Zocor, and about any medicines you are taking. For more information, talk to your doctor or call. Zocor, it's your future. Be there.
Modern marvels. They're simply enormous. They're awe-inspiring. How does a monumental idea become a monumental statue? Just what does it take to build these extraordinary towering visions? And what do they say about the artists who created them?
I guess you do have to be a little bit crazy, don't you, to do a thing like this?
Monumental statues. As Supersized Week continues on Modern Marvels. Tonight at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel. They followed the call of the wild into the vast unknown. Lone trappers who lived off the land.
The ones that were reckless didn't last long.
Their exploits made them legends. Set out for adventure with the trailblazers that brought America west. Mountain Men. Saturday at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel.
As the often macabre craft of profiling serial killers got underway, it began to produce some remarkably consistent results. In case after case, police discovered that almost every serial killer they faced was a nondescript, youngish white male living on the fringes of society. Each killer seemed to be acting on some dark rage that had festered since childhood. A horrifyingly typical case was Richard Ramirez, who began a rampage of increasingly savage attacks in California in 1985 that earned him the chilling nickname, the Night Stalker.
Police say 2 more homicides committed in early February outside the Los Angeles area have been linked to the Night Stalker.
He lived in flea-infested crack houses in downtown Los Angeles. He'd wake up late in the day from one of these hotels. He'd go have a breakfast. He'd go shoot pool. He'd buy drugs and shoot it up. And he'd start hunting.
Driving around and prowling through neighborhoods after dark, the man who became known as the Night Stalker held Southern California in a state of terror for months on end as he broke into houses to kill or to rape and mutilate.
He totally picked houses at random. The things that they had in common were they were close to the freeway for quick exit, and that a lot of them were veiled in shadow. This guy used shadows the way Fred Astaire used Ginger Rogers on the dance floor.
He would enter and he would be confronted by a sleeping male and he would just execute the male immediately, just put a gun up to the forehead and shoot him. And they would be eliminated, and then he would take the female and he would handcuff him or thumb cuff him in some manner, and then he would sexually assault them.
Someone like a Ramirez fits the bill in many respects. You have someone who is a bit of a loner, someone who most likely had difficulty forming enduring close relationships, intimate relationships with members of the opposite sex, someone whose lifestyle would have been described as marginal.
Ramirez grew up in a devout, strict Mexican Catholic household in El Paso, Texas. Authorities said that he suffered frequent beatings at the hands of his father, a former policeman with a tough law and order mentality. Police said he was sexually abused by a friend of the family who was a pedophile. But perhaps the boy's most telling exposure to violence, authorities suggested, came from a cousin who had served in Vietnam.
He witnessed his older cousin, Mike, who was a war hero in his eyes, kill his wife right in front of his eyes. And the effect, I can only assume, was absolutely traumatizing.
I don't know that that made him ultimately walk down the path that he eventually walked, but I do know it was definitely unhealthy, and I do know it was like the beginning of what grew into this psychosis.
The Night Stalker's psychosis apparently became uncontrollable on the night of May 19th, 1985, when he invaded an unlocked San Gabriel home where two elderly women, sisters in their 80s, were fast asleep.
For some reason, old women outraged this guy, this Night Stalker. He chose on this night a hammer, a red-handled hammer that he found in their kitchen, and he beat both the women over the head with the hammer and sexually assaulted them and bound them with wire from a lamp that he cut.
Ramirez left a bizarre calling card, a mark that told police they were dealing with someone who believed in witchcraft and Satanism.
He was just dabbling, just trying out the occult. On the wall, there was a pentagram and lipstick, and on one of the thighs, there was another pentagram drawn. So there were those referrals to Satan then.
The horror of the murders sparked intense media attention in Los Angeles that summer of 1985.
Today, the search for California's Night Stalker continues, and many residents sleep with their doors and windows bolted tight, despite 100-degree temperatures.
By July, Ramirez was striking out at his victims not every few months, but every few days. But slowly, a task force of homicide detectives began to piece together some clues to the killer's identity.
The Night Stalker always wore gloves. There wasn't one fingerprint in all those crimes. But he didn't take into account the fact that he was leaving footprints here, there, and everywhere.
And we got lucky in that manner in that the shoe that he happened to be wearing was a new shoe, was a patented sole. It had only been in America since February of that year. So we were able to do a lot with that shoe pattern.
Police also issued a composite sketch of the assailant in hope of tightening the dragnet in Los Angeles. But then, Ramirez suddenly struck in San Francisco, 400 miles to the north. There he killed two people, leaving a bloody signature, Jack the Knife, scrawled on the wall. The attack prompted an appeal from the city's mayor.
He's someone that will go into a home at night and will kill, and kills at random. Children, women, and men.
He didn't think he'd ever get caught. Towards the end of the Reign of Terror, he was assaulting 2-3 people a night.
When Ramirez returned to L.A., things began to go wrong for him. He was seen cruising suspiciously around a neighborhood by a boy who was fixing his bike on a front lawn.
This kid went to his parents. The parents went to the police. The police suddenly had the license plate number of the car the guy was in. Every single cop in Los Angeles looked for that car, and they found it.
Police picked out a single fingerprint on the car, and using a newly installed computer system, they were able to identify Ramirez from his previous record. They circulated his name and photograph to the media. The anonymous Night Stalker suddenly became one of the most recognizable figures in Los Angeles.
And he went into a liquor store to buy some orange juice or something, and he saw his picture plastered all over the paper, and he panicked. He tried to get on a bus. People on the bus recognized him. They started pointing at him. It's him, it's him. He got off the bus. Phone calls started coming into the Los Angeles Police Department.
And he started running, and it became one of the classic chases in history. He ran for 6.5 miles, helicopters, 40 police cars.
And he tried to steal a car from a citizen, a woman that was coming out to go to work or go somewhere. And the citizens saw that happening, and they rescued the woman from this attacker, hit him on the head with a piece of pipe, and held him till the sheriff's department showed up.
We're happy to announce that the individual we have in custody is Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker.
The terror that had lasted 5 months was over. The jury in the Ramirez case found the Night Stalker guilty of 13 murders and over 30 related felonies, and they recommended the death penalty.
You don't understand me. You are not expected to. You are not capable of it. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil.
It is the judgment and sentence of this court that Richard Ramirez shall suffer the death penalty.
A big deal. Death always went with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland.
In the course of his killing 13 people, Richard Ramirez received an avalanche of news coverage. Joel Rifkin, on the other hand, managed to kill 17 people without a whisper of publicity.
34-year-old Joel Rifkin could be one of the worst serial killers in New York history.
Rifkin's killings went virtually unnoticed during the early 90s because society had little interest in the fate of his female victims, all of them prostitutes.
He says he targeted 17 prostitutes for sex, then murder in the past 3 years.
He used to park across the street, you know, of the park, and he would ask me, but I wouldn't go.
And what did he say to you?
He told me, what, do I look like some psycho to you?
He chose his victims, he later admitted, because they reminded him of women who had rejected him, and he worked hard at keeping a low profile.
Even neighbors in Rifkin's upscale Long Island suburb were shocked. The unemployed landscaper never had a police record.
Living quietly with his mother and sister in the Long Island community of East Meadow, Rifkin frequently traveled to the streets of Lower Manhattan to pick up prostitutes. But then, something went wrong.
Rifkin was caught after state police tried to pull him over because there were no license plates on his pickup truck. They say Rifkin wouldn't stop. They followed him. It was then the police made a grisly discovery.
A strong odor came from the back of the vehicle. The troopers investigated and discovered the body of the white female wrapped in a tarp.
Police found the body of 22-year-old Tiffany Bresciani. They say she had been dead 3 days.
After interrogating Rifkin, the police are now looking into more than 15 unsolved homicides of women they believe to be prostitutes.
In fact, in the weeks that followed, one after another previously unsolved murder was successfully linked to Rifkin. When he came to trial in May of 1994, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict.
The jury rejected Rifkin's insanity defense and convicted him of second-degree murder for one of the killings.
For all the murders, Rifkin was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed at the time under New York state law, life in prison. Psychiatrists who examined him found many of the now classic characteristics in his background. Rifkin had been adopted as a child, had believed himself to be abandoned, and it was said had suffered irreparable psychological harm. One of the examining doctors was N.G. Beryl.
He was someone who impressed his peers as the odd man out, the odd duck, who was subject to various I would even describe them as tortures as a child from his peers, treated very harshly, and someone who began, like most of these guys, to live inside their head. By that I mean fantasy was a way of escaping the harshness of their life. And the fantasy was focused on retribution.
Danny Rolling exacted his form of retribution in a matter of days in Florida.
There looks like that there's somebody loose out there that's not all wired together right.
A drifter, originally from Louisiana, Danny Rolling did his killing in Gainesville, home of the University of Florida, over one weekend in late August of 1990.
In 3 consecutive days, the bodies of 5 college-aged victims have been discovered in a single section of this small college town. Some were found mutilated, one believed decapitated. Students who just arrived to start the school year were today packing up and heading home.
I'm scared to death. I called my mom and she was crying. She said, just come home.
In Miami, anxious parents greeted a flight full of Gainesville students who decided staying in school is not worth the risk.
As long as her safety is at risk, I'm going to bring her home.
Many other Gainesville students who've decided to stay have moved into dormitories from their off-campus apartments.
This is Williamsburg apartment complex. This is where we had our first homicides.
It was here 17-year-old Christina Powell and 18-year-old Sonia Larson were found murdered, their bodies mutilated and displayed in a way investigators still won't describe. Hours later, 18-year-old Krista Hoyt was found dead in her apartment. She had been decapitated, her head displayed on a bookshelf.
A day later, not far from the first murder scene, the bodies of 2 more victims were discovered.
More than 40 lawmen cordoned off the Gatorwood apartment complex on Archer
2 more
Road.
murders.
Inside a back apartment, there is the body of a man and a woman.
24-year-old Manny Taboda and 23-year-old Tracy Paulus. Her body was also displayed, and she had been raped.
You know what happened, you know where it happened, you know when it happened. You just can't figure out why it happened, and that's why we have people like Dr. Fox.
James Fox, a criminologist at Northeastern University with 11 years' experience in studying serial killers, had come to Gainesville to help with the investigation.
On a scale of viciousness, we're talking about someone at the far end of the spectrum. Someone who can kill in a brutal way and not satisfy his urge for murder.
There have been news reports that the killer may have taken parts of the body with him or her. What does that mean?
Serial killers are very much driven by their fantasies. Oftentimes they're sexual fantasies. And oftentimes they will use souvenirs as items to reminisce about a crime.
It was 9 months before Danny Rolling was finally apprehended, and almost 4 years before he was brought to trial.
After completing the sexual battery with great force upon Tracy Paulus, the defendant turned Tracy Paulus over on the bed, and with a premeditated design to effect her death, did then and there stab her 3 times in the back.
It was supposed to be the start of one of the most notorious murder trials in Florida history. Instead, defendant Danny Rolling stunned the courtroom by pleading guilty.
I've been running from first one thing and then another all my life. But there are some things that you just can't run from.
Relatives of the 5 slain students sobbed and shouted as a Florida judge imposed the death sentence.
It turned out that, like so many other serial killers, Rolling had suffered childhood abuse. The brutal treatment in his case coming from his father, who was a policeman. And so he tried, like other serial killers, to make up for his former sense of powerlessness.
These guys have an insatiable thirst for power, for domination, for control. They enjoy playing God and deciding who will live and who will die.
Another trait that all serial killers shared was they were all men. That is, until the case of Eileen Wuornos. That story when the 20th century returns.
Hey, what if I wanted to paint the sky? Where do I find the blues? Or the reds or golds or silver grays or some other sky-like hues? And hey, Van Gogh is yellow, how you brighten up your day? I need to travel to the stars, can you paint out the way? Say hello, where to go, whatever you want to know. Ask how, ask now, ask Sherwin-Williams. It's simply the best, better than all the rest, better than anyone.
Toyota Sienna did better overall in Insurance Institute crash tests than any other vehicle tested, ever.
When it comes to history, your opinion matters. That's why the History Channel is teaming up with Yahoo to bring you the History Channel Yahoo Poll. You provide the answers to questions that put history in today's perspective. The past is waiting for your present point of view at historychannel.yahoo.com. Think big. No, real big. The History Channel gets supercharged for Supersized Week on Modern Marvel. Think big wall, big bridge, big dam, big pyramids, and big statues. They were big before they had the tools to be big. It's a supersized week of Modern Marvel. All this week at 8 Eastern, 9 Pacific on the History Channel. April 1912. In the icy waters of the Atlantic, the unthinkable happened. How?
They could have literally overloaded the lifeboats to save a lot more lives.
The History Channel charts a fascinating course through this haunting tragedy. From the disastrous maiden voyage to exploring the wreckage, delve into the compelling saga of Titanic. Tonight at 10 Eastern, 11 Pacific on the History Channel.
As police learned more about the deadly plague of serial killers, they discovered they all fit a familiar profile. A young white male with a disturbed childhood who grew up to display a compulsive need to exact vengeance in some horrific way. That is, until 1992, when police were forced to change the profile.
I've been framed by the law enforcement as a serial killer because of numerous men involved.
Eileen Wuornos was a 35-year-old bisexual prostitute believed to have killed 7 men in Central Florida beginning in December of 1989.
Police and prosecutors describe Wuornos as the first known female serial killer to stand trial in this country.
Wuornos' killing career began on the road in Florida when she encountered Richard Mallory, who picked her up while driving east from Tampa. The first police knew of Mallory's fate was when they found his Cadillac abandoned and some of his belongings buried nearby. Then 2 weeks later, and a few miles from his car, his body was discovered.
2 individuals who were hunting for beer cans. As they were wandering through the woods, they found an odor, tracked the odor. They found his body buried underneath a piece of abandoned carpet.
After several months' investigation, the county sheriff's department realized that a multiple murderer was at work along the highways of Central Florida.
We learned through teletype that there was several other bodies that had been recovered in different parts of the state that met the same MO, that it was a male whose car had been abandoned miles from the body.
And as the search for the suspected serial killers continues, the map investigators are using to track the murders is getting wider.
Then investigators began to suspect that they were dealing with a female serial killer.
Well, each of the individuals were males that were traveling by themselves, and they wouldn't have just picked up anybody. They may have stopped to help a female in distress or a female hitchhiker. We started finding items that had been stolen from our victims showing up at some of the local pawn shops in different names, but indicating that it was a female that looked the same in each name.
A critical lead came in July of 1990 when a car that had belonged to one of the victims was involved in a crash. Riding in the car were Wuornos and her lesbian girlfriend, Tyria Moore.
At the scene of the accident, 2 females were seen leaving the car and running. A composite was made of the 2 females, and that was put in the newspaper. And that's when we started to get calls that those 2 females had been seen in the Daytona Beach area.
One of the places Wuornos and her companion had been sighted was a Daytona bikers bar called The Last Resort, a night spot where she is commemorated on their so-called Wall of Fame.
She used to just shoot pool and jukebox and a few beers and stuff like that. Favorite song on the jukebox was Digging Up Bones. She played that every time she came in.
Police watched Wuornos carefully as she spent her last night of freedom at the Last Resort bar.
We staked it out an entire night. She slept on the porch that night. We continued surveillance through the night and into the morning.
A couple of construction workers came in. I understand they were undercover cops. They just handcuffed her and put her in the car and they took her away.
Police also questioned her girlfriend, Tyria Moore. She broke off their relationship after the arrest and told officers that Wuornos had admitted to her that she had killed Richard Mallory. Wuornos herself confessed to the police in a videotaped interrogation, though she later claimed that her actions were in self-defense.
And she gave a full confession to all 7 murders. She said that she had been picked up hitchhiking and that on several of them that they had decided to exchange money and sex. And as that was taking place, she said that the men became violent.
Wuornos used the defense that she had been attacked several times before by customers, but that Mallory had been especially violent.
She had started carrying a gun within the last 6 months to protect herself because these attacks had occurred in the past, not quite this brutal, and she went for her purse, a struggle over the gun, and she ended up shooting him.
Time and time again, each victim is shot and robbed. Each victim is left in the same type of location, abandoned roadways. That's the sign of a serial killer, not the sign of somebody that's committing self-defense.
Her defense attorney agreed that once she had killed, even if it was in self-defense, the murders that followed became almost inevitable because she was mentally unstable.
I think she probably perceived threats that weren't all there, and that was, again, was a product of her mental illness, according to the numerous psychiatrists and psychologists that examined her.
It's almost as though she was looking for a particular individual out there to take her rage out on.
Wuornos's rage was apparently fueled by the same kind of abusive upbringing that is believed to influence male serial killers, a drive psychologists have described as a need for power after a childhood of powerlessness.
She was abandoned by her promiscuous teenage mother and was adopted by her grandparents. She was raped by her a friend of her grandfather's at the age of 14, subsequently gave up the child for adoption, and because of the shame she brought on her family was booted out in the street.
We, the jury, found the defendant, Eileen.
Despite that, the jury decided that Eileen Wuornos was simply a woman who had killed and that she should die herself.
The jury in the case recommended that Eileen Wuornos get the electric chair. Wuornos is a prostitute. She was convicted of killing a man who picked her up for sex. Wuornos has admitted killing 7 men.
While she was in prison, the Wuornos story took a curious turn. She was befriended and eventually adopted by a Christian family who believed in her innocence.
We saw the articles in the paper when she was first arrested, and we just looked into her eyes, my husband and I, in the paper, and we knew she was not capable of doing what they have claimed. Lee Wuornos is not a serial killer, and we're proud to be her mom and her dad.
After the Wuornos case, criminal investigators knew they would have to re-examine their serial killer profile.
I think it's a sign of the times. You see females committing more and more crime, and you see females starting to commit more violent crime. So it was probably only a matter of time before we started seeing a female that was going to follow the patterns of a lot of male serial killers.
I'll have some final thoughts when the 20th century concludes.
Sorry I'm late. Tell your dad the wedding's on me.
Still not done, but we'll finish it for free.
Wouldn't it be nice if everything were guaranteed like cable service? Because we're on time for installations or they're free. And we're on time for service appointments or you get $20.
Hi.
Guaranteed.
Sorry I was late. Here's $20.
Too bad everything's not guaranteed like cable service.
These days, at more and more hotels, breakfast is on the house. What's different about our complimentary breakfast is what you have to go through to get it. Embassy Suites, a design for living.
Insects love my lawn, and they seem to just zero in on it. And they tend to eat your grass, and before you know it, you've got some brown spots. Well, Turf Builder with insect control works great. It feeds the lawn really well, and then, of course, it gets rid of the insects. But fertilizing in the summer is not something a lot of people do. It's a very important step when the heat just really zaps the lawn. And the insect control especially keeps those insects from eating your lawn at its weakest. So I feed the lawn and get rid of those insects all at the same time. I love Scott's.
Ask your doctor about Viagra. The mission was to put a man into space at a time when Americans needed heroes, and these men delivered. It was now 1967.
Everybody had go fever. We've got to go. We've got to keep up with the schedule. We've got to get to the moon and back.
Apollo 1 was built. The half-million-mile journey was in sight until disaster struck on the ground.
We knew that the spacecraft was in poor shape relative to what it ought to be.
Moonshot. Tonight at 9 Eastern, 10 Pacific, only on the History Channel.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of a writer even greater than Paul Revere. From the History Channel, the official network of every millennium, this is Time Lab 2000. On April 19th, 1775, shots ring out at Lexington Green. Israel Bissell, a 23-year-old dispatch rider, gallops off to spread the news of revolution. Under his spurs, his horse takes wing. He makes Worcester a day's ride in just a few hours. To arms, he shouts, the war has begun. Then Connecticut, New York, and finally Philadelphia. In less than 5 days, he rides 345 miles, a record. Paul Revere, by contrast, rode only 20 miles. We'd remember Bissell better if Longfellow had written, "Listen, my children, and you shall whistle at the amazing ride of Israel Bissell." For the History Channel, I'm Sam Waterston.
Law enforcement officials have made great strides over the years in figuring out the kind of person drawn to serial killing. And their progress has enabled them to identify and apprehend suspects who in previous years might have slipped through their hands. Nonetheless, authorities will tell you they have only just begun to learn what makes a serial killer. Until police can comprehend more fully the mind of this macabre murderer, the rash of serial killing in America will go on and on. I'm Mike Wallace, and this is the 20th Century.